on page 39. There's an enormous amount of commentary on the 10 plagues. I'm going to skip it because it's available to everyone. I'm just going to mention an idea which is not widely known. The plagues can be divided into two groups. 1, 7, 9, and 10. Blood, hail, darkness, and plague of the firstborn is one category, and the rest is category 2. And the difference between them is this. The first ones, blood, hail, darkness, plague of the firstborn, are utterly anti-natural. Nothing resembling them occurs in the natural world at all. Rivers do not turn to blood, and hailstones with sparks of fire enclosed in each one do not fall from heaven. And continuous darkness, which is so palpable that you can't move from where you are sitting, also does not occur in the natural world. And there is no disease known to medical science that strikes only firstborn people. So these are utterly anti-natural events. All the rest are natural processes managed in a miraculous fashion. Don't get stuck on the first two words and forget the last. I say they're natural processes, that doesn't mean they're not miracles. They definitely are miracles. But the miracle is that a natural process behaves in an unnatural way. So, the frogs come when Moses says so. Their infestation is greater, more intense than at any other time in history. And it disappears exactly when Moses says it should disappear. That's not natural. But the frogs come from the Nile, where frogs breed all the time. So it's a natural process managed in a supernatural fashion. That's true for all of them. The lice, the wild beasts. I'm not dealing with Midrash now. The lice were a normal infestation of lice, but usually 10% of the population is infested. It doesn't happen naturally that 100% of the population is infested. Wild beasts are usually afraid of coming into human habitations. Here they lost their fear and just wandered around without any fear. But it wasn't pterodactyls. It was lions and bears and other natural wild beasts. The disease that killed the animals, the boils. Again, I'm ignoring Midrashim now. I'm just dealing with the pshat. The locusts are blown in on the wind. That's how locusts travel. Always. Yeah, they have wings. They cannot fly hundreds of miles. Long distance travel they do by being blown on the wind. And that's how they came in here. Although it happened exactly when Moses said, and the wind blew in one direction the whole night, and the infestation was much worse than it had ever been before. And when Moses said it should end, there wasn't a single one left. It doesn't happen that way. I think that there are two different messages from the two different categories of plagues. The first, if you look at the plagues through the eyes of a contemporary polytheist, idol worshiper, the first category establishes that the Jews have a God who can, on occasion, override nature and cause unnatural things to happen. The second category has a much more subtle and far-reaching message, and that is the processes that we normally regard as natural may also be the expression of the will of the Jewish God. After all, in ancient polytheistic conceptions of the world, each natural force that you want to account for has a God behind it. There's a God of the sun, a God of the moon, a God of the wind, a God of the tides, the sea, and a God of fertility, and a God of death, God of victory and war. Each one has a single God in charge of that process. You don't have committees, double-ups, going on vacation and being replaced by a subordinate. If, under Moses' command, the Jewish God controls frog production, who's controlling it the rest of the time? Even in the conception of the ancient polytheist, there's no room for two. So this now leads to a much more profound implication that what people call the forces of nature isn't really nature at all, but it's also the activity of the Jewish God. I think that the plagues were designed to create both of these implications, and they're both very, very important. I would get it? Yeah.
I wasn't clear on the distinction between Maccas Bephoris and other Maccas. Maccas Bephoris was a supernatural plague.
Anti-natural. They're all supernatural. They're all supernatural. But this is anti-natural. Right.
So couldn't it have been a natural phenomenon like a heart attack just applied in
A what?
Like a heart attack or something like that, or a normal disease just applied to the Bechor?
But that's not natural. It's not natural that it picks out only the firstborn people. If God causes a plague and certain people just drop dead, that's not natural. They may drop dead, their hearts may stop beating. That's not natural that these designated people without any disease and midlife and so forth and so on should all drop dead.
It has a difference to the Dever, the Tzfardeo, the Kinim, which is natural things, but suddenly popping up in an unexpected place and being applied unexpectedly.
Because there, the process was a process of disease. It's called Dever. Dever is a certain type of cattle sickness. You can see the cause of death in each case. Right? Here, they just drop dead. It's not natural for people to start dropping dead all over,
The Jewish owned animals didn't drop dead.
Yes.
And the frogs, they only went to certain places. They didn't go into other places.
The frogs, what? Sorry.
They only went into certain places. They didn't go to Jewish homes.
Well, they didn't go to Jewish homes, but everywhere else they went. They went into the furnaces. They went into the beds. They went right. So I'm not following you.
That's also not the natural, the normal expected action of this natural phenomenon. You'd expect it to go everywhere, just like you expect the disease to strike all people, not just the firstborns. It's not clear.
Correct, but I'm not saying that the plague of the frogs was a natural event. It's not a natural event. So there's another aspect of it which is clearly not natural. But they didn't drop from the heavens. They didn't grow out of the flower pots. They came from where they normally come from. So that means God is hijacking the frog production, the normal process of frog production, and using it for a clearly supernatural purpose. Right? That's my thesis. Right? Of course, we wouldn't expect them to go where frogs always go. They have to show in some way that it's not a natural event. It's not a natural event, but it's supernatural in the way of hijacking a natural process and using it in a supernatural way. And the supernatural may include going to this house and not the adjacent house and so forth and so on. That's all part of the supernatural hijacking.
As opposed to Maccas Bephoris, just to get it clear, how's that different?
Because there's absolutely no natural component at all.
Do we know that they didn't drop dead from some?
You do not interpret verses by saying, since the verse didn't rule it out, so therefore maybe it's so, and building a castle on that. I mean, really vicious people say maybe Moses was a transvestite. Where does it say he wasn't a transvestite? So maybe this is a plea in favor of sexual tolerance. Sorry, if there's no hint to it positively, I don't, right? It just says that God killed him, that's all. Whereas Dever is a kind of disease that's known. It's a cattle disease. Boils are boils, lice are lice. Doesn't say they all started scratching. If they all started scratching without any cause, then I would say that belongs in the other category. Many people don't just scratch. Right? Okay, now, so we did the 3 paragraphs of the multiplying by 10 yesterday. So we're on to page 41. Now we come to one of those very difficult passages, Dayenu. There are 15 levels here. 15 is an important number. There are 15 stages in the whole Haggadah. There are 15 songs of ascent. Anyway, there are 15 levels. You read through them. He took us out of Egypt, executed judgment against the Egyptians and against their gods, killed the firstborn, gave us their wealth, split the sea, led us through on dry land, drowned our oppressors, provided for our needs in the desert, fed us manna for 40 years, gave us the Sabbath, brought us close to Mount Sinai, gave us the Torah, and brought us into the land of Israel and built a temple. Now, on each one we say, if he had done just that, would have been enough. Well, clearly it's not correct. I mean, it's inconceivable to say that he brought us out of Egypt and then abandoned us, and chose the Sumerians to give the Torah to, and that's just insane. That certainly is not the meaning of the passage. I know 2 commentaries, but if you look up, I'm sure there are at least 3 dozen. One is that it would have been enough to justify our celebration of Thanksgiving, an obligation of gratitude. Each one alone would have been enough. I think is a reasonable interpretation. And another reasonable interpretation, a little bit more subtle, is if only one of these had taken place as a clear miracle, and all the rest had taken place in a quasi-natural way, that too would have been enough to justify that we should celebrate what happened. In other words, all the rest of them, even if had done in a quasi-natural way, would have justified celebration. I don't mean to say that the one that was clearly supernatural would be celebrated and the rest of them weren't, but the whole process would be celebrated, even though only one was clearly supernatural. By the way, the commentators point out there are 15 here. 5 of them are destroying the Egyptians. 5 of them are providing for the Jews' physical needs, and 5 of them are providing for the Jews' spiritual needs. I'll leave you to make the calculations. Okay, together up to here. Now, the next paragraph just goes through the whole 15 again. So, since any one of them would have been enough to justify our Thanksgiving, all the more so since God did all 15. Did all 15. And the paragraph lists all 15 and then adds at the end 4 extra words. Brought the land of Israel, built the temple to atone for all our sins. L'chaper al kol avonoseiנו. For decades, when I read those words, I felt lost. The whole Haggadah is positive. It's inspiring. It's a picture of God saving the Jewish people being elevated and given the Torah and everything else. Why throw in, don't forget your sinners, don't forget your failures, and the Torah and the temple's going to give you kapara, cleansing for all your failures. I mean, why throw that in? Why is it? How does it fit the whole tone, the whole context of what we're doing? I asked this of my Rabbi Zatzal, and he gave me what I think is a beautiful and brilliant answer. He says, think of what this paragraph tells us. How much more so should we be grateful to the Omnipresent for all the numerous favors He showered upon us? And it goes through all 15. Now just imagine, after all 15 have occurred, that the Jews rebel. The Jews rebel. They perform transgressions. It would be very natural for God to say, after all that, you're still rebelling against me? Finished, I've had it with you, I'm not interested in you anymore. God's love for us and His concern for us and His care for us goes so far that after all 15, God says, yeah, but maybe you're going to fail. Maybe there's something going to go wrong. I'm going to give you a way to cleanse yourself of things that go wrong after all 15. I think that's exquisite. Instead of saying, look what I've done for you, that's the limit. Beyond here, you're responsible for yourself. And if you fail, you're going to get clobbered. God says, even after all 15, if you fail, I want you to have a way to repair yourselves. So I think it's an addition of the positive. It's not negative at all. Okay, now we come to another expression of the theme which we've mentioned at least 3 times up until now. Rabbi Gamliel used to say, whoever has not explained the following 3 things on Pesach has not fulfilled his duty. Namely, Pesach, Paschal sacrifice, matzah, and more of the bitter herbs. We're coming up now to 3 paragraphs which will explain the symbolism of those 3 items that are eaten. Gamliel used to say, whoever has not explained these things, either by reciting his paragraphs or giving some parallel explanation, has not fulfilled his duty. Lo yatzeh yedei chovaso. 2 questions here. Which duty is that? Which obligation is it that he has not fulfilled? And number 2, does it really mean not fulfilled, period? Not fulfilled usually means, in halakhic terms, that if you didn't do that, you got to go back and do it again. I'll tell you straight out, all the commentators agree that that's not correct. If you omit this, you still have done the mitzvos, and you don't have to go back and do them again. Which obligation is it that he has failed to fulfill perfectly? Here the commentators are split. One idea is that the obligation to tell the story of the Exodus is incomplete without explaining the symbolism of the 3 items in the menu. The other is that the mitzvah of eating those 3 items is incomplete if you don't explain the symbolism of the 3 items in the menu. Both explanations have a profound implication, same implication, but the second, I think, has it in an even more profound way. What are the mitzvahs of the night of the Seder? There are 4. One is to tell the story of the Exodus, as I've indicated to you, and this is going to be another confirmation to relive the story of the Exodus, not just to explain it and communicate the information, and to eat 3 things: eat the Paschal sacrifice, eat matzah, and eat bitter herbs. Those are the 4 commandments. The first thought is, telling the story of the Exodus from Egypt is not satisfactory, not done in the best possible way, if you don't link the story of the history to what you're doing now. If you just tell it as information about the past, and then at the end of 2 hours of reciting this material, say, oh boy, it's been a difficult evening, time for supper, and bring out the Paschal sacrifice and the matzah and the mor, and you eat that because that's what's the prescribed menu, then the story that you told is related only to the past. And your supper is what you eat, when you're hungry. So the statement in the Haggadah says you have not completely fulfilled your mitzvah of telling the story because you didn't relate it to the present. You didn't relate it to the present performance. That's an indication that the story is not just about the past. Even more so if you take the second opinion. Second opinion says, when you eat them, if you don't know what they symbolize, you have not fulfilled the mitzvah of eating them in the best possible manner. So that means eating them is not just supper. It's just because I'm hungry, having spent 3 hours, up to this point. It means eating them has to be a symbolic act, carrying the symbolism of what happened 3,300 years ago. Both of these explanations carry the implication of what I told you a few days ago, and repeating now, that when you recite the Haggadah, you're not just reviewing ancient information. You are, in fact, reliving it, and that's going to be confirmed directly by the paragraph on the next page, which we saw a couple of days ago. We'll see it again. Okay, the idea is clear to you? Let's see what the symbolism is. This is not too, if you don't, I'm going too deep. Pesach, why did our fathers eat a Passover offering during the period when the temple still stood? Because the Holy One, blessed be He. Now, I told you this yesterday. They translate Pesach as passed over. I tell you that doesn't mean passed over, it means passed onto. That the Torah says that there was a destroyer, and God prevented the destroyer from coming into the houses by passing from house to block the entry of the destroyer. So the Pesach in Hebrew doesn't mean to pass over, it means to jump from one position to another position. And therefore the holiday shouldn't be translated in English as Passover. It is the Pesach offering for Hashem, who passed onto the houses of the children of Israel when He struck the Egyptians, spared our houses. And you see, here the translator is stuck because he's translated Passover. But the Hebrew is not spared our houses. It says saved our houses. That's an entirely different meaning. You can't say He saved the house by just passing over and doing nothing. That's not saving. Saving means there's a danger and you prevent it. You defend against it. And the people bowed down and prostrated themselves. Matzah, why did these is unleavened bread? Because the door of our fathers did not have time to become leavened before the King of Kings, the Holy One, blessed be He, revealed Himself to them and redeemed them. As is written, they baked the dough which they had brought out of Egypt into unleavened bread, for it had not fermented. Because, now let's stop and think, because, why is it that on the night of the 16th, after having left and trekked through the desert, and they came to their first resting place as free people, they baked matzah? Why did they do that? Torah says, I'll tell you why. Because when they prepared these doughs in their habitations in Egypt the night before, it didn't ferment. Why not? Why not? The Egyptians are dying with the death of the firstborn. The Jews are waiting for morning to go out. There's plenty of time, hours and hours. Why didn't it ferment? Because they didn't wait a long time. Because they couldn't wait a long time. Because they were driven out of Egypt and could not delay. They were driven out. The Egyptians drove them out, and they couldn't delay. Meaning, had the Egyptians not driven them out, then they would have delayed. They weren't in a hurry, especially because they have to make challahs for the way to go. And they're going to wrap them in saran wrap, and keep them fresh till when they come to rest the following night. Because, according to certain authorities, on that first night in Egypt, the only prohibition was to eat chametz. And that prohibition was only one 24-hour period long. So they could have baked the chametz, they could have had it with them, traveled with it, and the following night they could have used that chametz, which they baked in Egypt, for their first meal. But no, they were driven out, forced out. They couldn't, how do they translate it here? Could not delay. They would have if they weren't driven out. They couldn't delay, and that's why when they finally got to the resting place, they weren't going to wait 3 hours for it to rise up like a good dough, like a good challah. They made matzahs as they were used to. Now, I struggled with this for many years. 2 years ago, one of my sons-in-law said, my problem is very simple, and he solved it right away. I do still think there's a hint here. We're eating this unleavened bread because on the night of Pesach, the night which is the beginning of the 16th of the month, we were pushed out in a hurry. And matzah symbolizes bread baked in haste. Bread baked when there's no time. And if you've seen the productions here in the matzah bakeries, from the time the water hits the flour until the time the matzah comes out of the oven is about 13 minutes. Not 18 minutes. 18 minutes is extra. It's about 13 minutes. That's something which you could do at home. Make a dough, slap it on the side wall of the oven, comes out right away. The haste is what's important here, which the eating of the matzah on the night of the 16th, the beginning of the 16th, symbolizes. There's something else in here, but I don't want to do it now. Bitter herbs, that's obvious because they made their lives bitter. That's the explanation of the symbolism. So when you sit at the Seder and you eat these things, today we don't eat the matzah because we don't have the temple, and the bitter herbs is linked to the Paschal sacrifice. So the fact that we eat it today is only rabbinic. But that's what one should have in mind. Now, having said this, explained Rabbi Gamliel's statement about the symbolism, we come to the paragraph which we saw 2 days ago. In every generation, it is one's duty to regard himself as though he personally had gone out of Egypt. As it is written, you shall tell your son on that day. Those words are referring to the future, after the Exodus. When you celebrate the anniversary, tell your son on that day, it was because of this that Hashem did for me when I went out of Egypt. And if that isn't clear enough to you, maybe I and we refers to the nation and kinds of references we had back at the beginning. The text is absolutely explicit. It was not only our fathers, whom the Holy One, blessed be, redeemed from slavery. We, too, were redeemed with them. As it is written, he brought us out from there so that he might take us to the land which he had promised to our fathers. So this is where it becomes explicit what's been going on in all the pages up to here. And that is that we are experiencing the Exodus vicariously, to be sure, but we're experiencing the Exodus in the recital of the Haggadah. It's not a communication of information. That explains all of the things that we said at the beginning that are dependent upon that. Are we together?
Just so what does it mean? What does that actually mean?
Means,
us out. What does that mean?
it means that we also experience an Exodus. And there's a whole literature, especially in the Hasidic literature, that people have. The word Mitzrayim in Hebrew comes from the word Meitzar, which means boundary. And there are times in life maybe it applies in certain respects at all times in life, that there are boundaries. There are boundaries that limit you, that make it seemingly impossible to grow, to develop, to take steps forward. And just as the boundaries in Egypt dissolved, so for each and every individual, boundaries can dissolve.
Is the implication not that then it happened for them, it happened for us as well? So
Right. That's the point. Right.
Not tonight. Not tonight means then.
No, that's just false.
Doesn't mean that.
It's just false, right? You weren't there in Egypt. You've never been to Egypt.
It could be, spiritually, my soul was there, that kind of thing.
No, it's much simpler than that. Much more direct than that. And that's why it comes directly after Rabbi Gamliel. Rabbi Gamliel is telling you that you have to apply the history to the present. So it's telling you that what happened on the night of Pesach is something that's available in all future generations. The same spiritual dynamic is available in all future generations. Now, the Maharal makes a very acute remark here. There are two verses. The first one, the beginning of this, the first part of this paragraph, it was because of this that Hashem did for me when I went out of Egypt. The second one, He brought us out from there, so that He might take us to the land which He promised our fathers. Now, what's the difference? Why is there any reason why you would need both verses? Okay, the paragraph stresses it, makes it more explicit, but in the Torah, what difference is there between these two verses that might indicate that they communicate different messages? Those of you who know me, you know I'm referring to something that's right on the surface. Nothing subtle, nothing Kabbalistic, right on the surface. What's the difference between the verses? You didn't see it? The first one refers to I and me, and the second one refers to us. Singular and plural. And this refers to the fact that every Jew, and every Jew, plays a double role in the world. He has a role in the world as an individual, and he has a role in the world as an element in a nation. And God's exodus from Egypt applies to both roles. Number one, each and every individual is important, and his ability to serve God without prevention is an important thing. And secondly, the individual has to be conscious of the fact that the role he plays is essentially related to the position he has within the nation. That creates certain communal responsibilities that are part of his essential role. Both are necessary. So the Maharal says that the doubling of the language is to teach both of those lessons.
Where do you see the doubling of the language again?
The first one is, it is because of this that Hashem did for me when I went out of Egypt. The second one says, He brought us out of there so that each one speaks of the one who's saying the words. It's a reflexive pronoun. But one is I and me, and the other one is us. And now, the Haggadah summarizes this theme that I've been telling you, for which we've had at least 5 references already. Therefore, it is our duty to thank, praise, pay tribute, glorify, exalt, to honor, bless, extol, same Him who, performed all these miracles for our fathers and for us. Because you only give thanks to God and praise and song to God when you experience something. Merely reciting, recalling the past events, don't do that. We saw at the beginning of the Haggadah, there's a mitzvah to remember and mention the exodus from Egypt twice every day. Twice every day. You don't have a duty under those conditions to thank, praise, pay tribute, glorify, exalt, honor, bless, extol, exclaim. You don't say Halal. You don't sing praises because you're just mentioning it. You're just mentioning it.
Say Shira.
Sorry?
Say Shira in the mornings.
Yeah, but that's not part of the mitzvah of Schiras Mitzias V'Shrayim. That's carried out by the one verse at the end of the Shema. That's all. So the idea that you are re-experiencing it through this time gives rise to this paragraph. So He brought us forth from slavery to freedom. Okay, we have all of these things. Let us therefore recite a new song before Him. I just want to tell you a tiny thing, which shows you how much it pays to pay attention to tiny things. The word in Hebrew which means song, in this paragraph, if you look at the Hebrew paragraph, the bottom line, 3 words from the end, is shira. Shira, you've probably heard that word. By the way, shir and shira in Hebrew, strictly speaking, mean poetry. They mean poetry, not necessarily with music. That's why in the Psalms, where some of them have the title Mizmor Shir, that's not redundant. Mizmor means music, and shir means poetry. At any rate, and poetry has a special role. Okay, I'm not going to do that. Here it's shira. Now, if you look on the next page, this is 3 paragraphs later, 4 lines to the end of the paragraph. We shall then sing a new song. Now, if you look in the Hebrew, next to last line, 3 words from the beginning of the line, it's shir, not shira. What's the difference between shir and shira? Hey, okay. One commentator says the following: shira is feminine, shir is masculine. Women undergo salvations regularly when they give birth. A woman giving birth is in terrible pain. In past times, she was in danger. Many children died as infants, and many women died in childbirth. When the birth is successful and she and the baby are healthy, there is a salvation there. But that salvation looks forward to a new danger. No woman wants to stop having children after 1. So it's a temporary salvation. It's a temporary salvation looking forward to future danger and future salvations. That's the feminine word, shira. The masculine word refers to ultimate, complete, permanent salvation. And that's why they're put where they are in the Haggadah. On 47, it's talking about our obligation every Pesach to glorify God for the salvation that He performed for us from Egypt. There were many, many dangers and disasters after the exodus from Egypt. There was the Babylonian conquest and exile. There was the Roman conquest and exile. That wasn't the end of our dangers and need for salvation. That's why the word is shira, the feminine word. But on page 49, we are talking about what we will do in the future when the temple will be rebuilt and the Mashiach will be here. That's shir. That's permanent. After that, there'll be no more threats, no more dangers, and no need for future salvations. Now look what difference one letter can make if you pay careful attention to it. Okay, now we have...
Why didn't we choose to say the no more of Shir Chadash? We want to end all of this.
We do. It is shir. Shir is masculine. Masculine is permanent. On page 49, the word 48, the word is shir. Oh no, we haven't got the same pages. Oh, I'm sorry. The shir, the masculine one, is right before rachza in big red letters. I'm sorry, there are 2 editions here, and I forgot about that. Now, another application of this theme that we've been talking about, reliving the Exodus. On page, well, I don't know what page it is now, 47 or, they're two pages behind? Well, they have 45? I never got to go entirely. Okay. You have the first 2 paragraphs of Halal. Halal is Psalms 113 through 118, which we recite with a few changes, which we recite on holidays when we are giving thanks for salvations. And we do that at the Seder. But we do it in a very funny way. The first 2 paragraphs, first 2 Psalms, 113 and 114, we do before the meal. And after the meal, we finish it up. The usual legal rule is you're not allowed to have any interruption in the recital of Halal. Even if you are aficionados and you know when you do make blessing, you don't make a blessing. Sfardim, Ashkenazim, Tosfos says, even if you don't make a blessing, you're not supposed to interrupt. But golly, after the first 2 paragraphs, we're going to stop and eat a meal. All sorts of other things are going to happen, including eating. I can't imagine a more global interruption than that. But we've answered that question already. We've answered that question already.
What are the two different salvations?
Sorry?
Two different salvations?
No. Even though you're right about the content of them, no.
Part of the eating is the part of the experience.
It's all one continuous performance of reliving the Exodus. So it's not an interruption. It's not an interruption. Eating the meal, especially the three symbolic eatings, for us it's 1 or 1.5, and having a festal meal, and the way you conduct yourself at the meal is not an interruption. It's just a continuation of the same experience. And that's not called an interruption.
Is it true to say that it's actually part of the Haggadah, the Thanksgiving, the meal, and that's all part of the Halal? Or is that going too far?
The Halal itself, as the Thanksgiving, is part of the reliving. Other way around, it's part of the reliving. The reliving is the central theme. If you're reliving a salvation, giving thanks to God is part of reliving that salvation.
So the meal is actually part of the Halal, that's not correct?
No, the other way around. The Halal is part of what the meal is part of. It's all part of, no, I don't think so. Now I want to skip to page 51. We eat matzah, we eat more separately for a very particular reason. You eat them together, you won't satisfy the mitzvah of matzah correctly. There's a whole long Gemara about that. And then we eat a sandwich. Sandwich. Remembers the temple, we do as Hill did in temple times. He would combine. Now, some people say the Paschal offering, which is true historically, but we don't have it, so some people are sensitive not to say it. Matzah more in a sandwich and eat it together. Fulfill what is written in the Torah, they shall eat it with matzahs and bitter herbs. And according to Hillel, it wasn't with in the sense that it's a long meal, guys, you know. At minute 16, we'll eat the meat, and at minute 25, we'll eat the matzah, and at minute 36, we'll eat the myrrh. No, he held with means with together, mouthful by mouthful, bite by bite. My Rabbi Zatzal stressed a great deal that the Torah applies to emotions, not just to actions and beliefs and attitudes, but also to emotions. And we have a relationship with the past of the temple, but it's a 2 or 3 dimensional relationship. Some of you are aware of what's called Zecher l'Churban, reminding ourselves of the destruction of the temple. A number of customs that are connected to that, including halachas. We have fast days. And when a person gets married, a man gets married, he puts ashes from the temple on his forehead. And at a wedding, we smash a goblet of some kind. For many people, when you have a house and you paint the house, you leave a large square of the wall unpainted. Means the house is not complete because the temple doesn't exist. These are Zecher l'Churban. They are remembering the destruction of the temple. Here you have a different phrase, Zecher l'Mikdash. We're doing what Hillel did, Zecher l'Mikdash. Are we injecting an element of mourning into the Passover, Pesach Seder? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. First of all, that wouldn't be appropriate because it's a holiday. You don't do that on a holiday. But that's not the concept. And that's why it has a different title. The concept is that in a certain sense, there's a remainder of the temple in the world. I don't mean the rocks, on the Temple Mount. There's a spiritual remainder of the temple in the world, and we can access that. We can access that. And this is a positive relationship to that past. So we say, Hillel did something. Now, how the rabbis chose which things we should do in order to have that relationship to that remainder of the temple, I have no clue. They were operating on a dimension, infinitely deeper than I can grasp. But that's what's going on here. Hillel did this, and when we do it, we're connecting to that. Some of you know that we take the Lulav and Esrog for 7 days, Mayan Shabbos. The biblical commandment is that it was taken for only 1 day. Only in the temple was it taken for 7 days, but everywhere else in the world was taken for only 1 day. We take it for 7 days because we're trying to relate to what remains of the temple in the world. Some people say that the holiday of Shavuos, this is quite radical, but there are those who say it, the whole holiday of Shavuos in our times is rabbinic. The whole holiday is rabbinic. Why? Because the holiday of Shavuos is 50 days after the beginning of Pesach. And those 50 days are connected by counting the 49 days of the Omer. And the 49 days of the Omer are the 49 days of the Omer. They're the 49 days of the Omer. And we don't have an Omer. And if we don't have an Omer, then there are no 49 days of the Omer. Forget it. Which means counting the 49 days is only rabbinic. Because that's what was done in the times of the temple, and we do it also. And then we get to a Shavuos, which is for us only rabbinic, because again, that's what was done. So now, I don't mean you to misunderstand me. I'm not saying this is the way it is. I say there are views that this is the way it is, it's a minority, but it's a very interesting view. That means all of this is, again, Zecher Mikdash. So one has to keep very clearly separate in one's mind when you're relating to the historical temple, whether you're relating to the destruction of the temple or whether you're relating to what remains of the temple in a positive sense. And here with Hillel, that's definitely what's going on. Then comes benching. Then comes page 63. Now, all the liberals have absented themselves because they can't stand this paragraph. It's definitely eliminated from the reformist types of Haggadahs. It's a terrible, terrible thing. Bottom paragraph of the page. Pour your wrath upon the nations that do not recognize you, and upon the kingdoms that do not invoke your name, for they have devoured Jacob and destroyed his habitation. Pour your anger upon them. Let your fiery wrath overtake them. Pursue them with wrath and annihilate them from beneath the heavens of Hashem. My. How brutal, how warlike, how vengeful. When the Tanakh, the Book of Kings, describes the end of King David's life, it says something which bothered me for many, many years. Until I came across an essay by Rabbi Gottlieb, which enabled me to understand it. How does King David die? What is the last thing that he does? Well, Solomon is standing in front of him, and he tells him about the future and what kind of role he should play and how he should conduct himself, what God wants of him. The last thing he says to Solomon is, and by the way, there were certain people who wronged me, cursed me, rebelled against me. Don't let them die a peaceful death. Make sure they get killed. Make sure they get killed. That's the last words King David speaks. Don't forget to kill those guys. And then he dies. I'm trying very hard to outgrow my liberal past. As Churchill said, if you're not a liberal at 20, you have no heart, and if you're still a liberal by 30, you have no brain. And I'm inclined to think that both of those statements are correct. I don't usually do politics, but here I can. But the last thing that King David does is give instructions to kill his enemies? Like, Rabbi says the following. People who attack the Jewish people, the Torah, which often is the same thing, create a desecration of God's name in the world. Punishing them is a sanctification of God's name in the world. The world is not ownerless. The world is not without direction. The world is not without control. But, King David said, to take revenge has to be done with absolute purity. The one who's taking revenge because he was attacked, and of course, his being attacked means that God was being attacked. King David was king of the Jewish people. The one who's going to take revenge on behalf of the attack on God must get no personal benefit from it. No personal benefit, not even satisfaction. Not even satisfaction. It has to be done with absolute disinterested purity. So King David says, I'm going to wait to my very last breath. Then I'm going to give the command to have these people executed. I will not experience it. Not only want to experience it, I won't have 2 hours to feel the satisfaction that, oh boy, they're going to get it. Wow, they've only got a few hours to live. He minimized it to the extent humanly possible, that he gave the instruction only at the very end of his life. No, I don't take that seriously. At any rate, that's what he said. Now, I think that that's a little bit of background for what we have here. Nations that attack Jacob do so, usually there's underlying animus of hatred of the Torah. The Chazal say the word Sinai, which is the name of the mountain on which the Torah was given, is also the word Sinah, which means hatred. When the Torah came into the world, hatred of the Jewish people came into the world. Because we represent a reality that the rest of the world would not like to acknowledge. A reality which they would prefer didn't exist. It threatens not only their philosophy, but their whole lifestyle. It threatens their values and priorities. So the attack on the Jewish people is something which carries that background. There was a mashgiach of a yeshiva, the spiritual head of a yeshiva in New York, whose name was Shlomo Carlebach, not the one who made the songs. And I met him many years ago. And he made to me what to me was a very important point. He said, okay, people who say that the Holocaust killed it for them, they couldn't believe in God. After that, they just gave up everything. Because how could God let that happen? He said, I often ask them, okay, so what's your picture of the world? The picture of the world is random, accidental, no guide, no manager. Then why is it always the Jews? Why is it always the Jews? That's random? That's accident? It doesn't look that way. It looks like it's a consistency over thousands of years. The first blood libels were invented by the Greeks. More than 2,000 years ago. The Christians took it over from the Greeks. 2,000 years of blood libels. No blood libels against heretical Christian sects and so forth and so on. Just the Jews. That's because the challenge that the Jewish people levels at the world is one of undermining their whole mode of life. Challenging that, punishing that, injuring that, damaging that is a chilul Hashem, is a desecration of God's name. And here, what we are asking for is a rectification of God's name in the world. Look how it starts. Pour wrath upon the nations that do not recognize you. Upon the kingdoms that do not invoke your name. The destruction of the Jewish people is the second and third sentence, not the first sentence. The essential failure is they are against you. Now, being against you, they've devoured us. So then we are the injured parties in their attempt to deny you. And therefore we are the ones who are wishing for the revenge. Just like King David. Got a question?
You said that Mount Sinai was when hatred of Jews entered the world, but doesn't it say earlier on, like way back in Bereshit, that the Egyptians hated the sons of Yaakov, hated Jews, for lack of a better word?
Not at all. I don't know anywhere where it says they hated them. Not at all. When they take them into their land for 120 years, and they are the upper class, and they are treated with the greatest deference, and they're given all sorts of privileges, and so forth and so on. I don't know of any reference whatsoever that they were hated there. And then Pharaoh says, they've become so numerous and so mighty, we're afraid of them, let's do something to minimize them. But hating the Jews? Indeed, when the brothers come down to Egypt, they come down the first time, Joseph says to his butler, we're going to have lunch, and we're inviting these people to oh, I know what you're referring to. We're going to have lunch, prepare for them food the way they have it, take the animals, slaughter them, and prepare them the way the Hebrews do in the land of Canaan. And we as Egyptians will eat something else. What it says is they hate shepherds. They hate shepherds. And they hate shepherds because shepherds regularly eat the animals which the Egyptians held to be holy animals. But they can sit in the same room. They don't sit at the same table because the Jews eat what the Egyptians regard as a sacred animal, but they sit at the same table. They sit in the same room, and there's no slinging of mud across the rooms and everything else. Egypt was a cosmopolitan society. Lots of people came there. It was an empire. And when Joseph says, prepare for them in their way, that's taken as quite natural. So I don't think he didn't hate Jews. He wanted them to be, they wanted to distance themselves from them because they ate the animals which they thought of as holy animals. Okay, that's this paragraph. Then comes the rest of Halal. There's a different way of saying Halal at the end. And then, okay, I'll just, it says at the very end of everything, on page 79, there's next year in Jerusalem. Okay, time for a quiz. Are you going to say next year in Jerusalem? You're in Jerusalem. You're in Jerusalem now. What do you mean next year in Jerusalem? Why not saying, thank you for enabling us to do it in Jerusalem? What's the answer?
We're not doing it.
Say again?
We aren't doing it.
Oh, but that's here. The point is the location, not what you're doing. Because we don't have a temple, we didn't offer the sacrifice. Is that what you mean? Mm-hmm. Yeah, but here it just says next year we should be in Jerusalem. We are in Jerusalem, yeah.
Are you talking about the fact that even though we're in Jerusalem now, we're still in exile?
No, you got the right locus of ideas, right reference, but the other way around. Yeah.
Well, didn't we say before an idea about, we should be around, everyone is in here.
Who's the we that should be next year in Jerusalem? Not me personally. We as the Jewish people. The majority of the Jewish people are still outside. Next year in Jerusalem, that the whole of the Jewish people should be together celebrating the Haggadah, the Pesach. Page 91, at the very end, which is Haggadah, a song in Aramaic, and it is a song of successive victimizations. A cat devoured the kid, meaning a small goat or lamb. Dog bit the cat, stick bit the dog. Fire burned the stick, water quenched the fire, ox drank the water. Slaughterer slaughtered the ox. The angel of death slaughters the slaughterer. Which means that in the end, everything's restored. This is a picture of the bitter, violent, destructive processes through which history goes. And of course, each one was a victor for a while, gets beaten up by the next victor, the next conqueror. Don't tell that to the Americans because they believe they're going to be there forever. But history shows that that's a vain hope. And eventually, each nation gets conquered sooner or later. And in the end, HaKadosh Baruch Hu will put the end to the entire process because the whole process was his doing in the first place. It isn't as if he just comes in at the end. The whole process is a divine process leading to an end that the divine will wants to come about.